Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Deckled Edges. I'm your host, Camilla, and today I am wired to talk about Stormlight Archive again, but we're not going to do that, unfortunately. I'm sorry for everyone who was expecting another Stormlight Archive episode, but that's not going to happen because I thought that we should take a little break. We already had 2 full episodes on The Way of Kings characters, and I'm contemplating whether to make another one on the plot or if we should just move right along onto Words of Radiance. But I really think it would be kind of counterintuitive to get all that out right away, even though I know there's 2 weeks in between each upload. But I think it's good to take a little mind break from really, really, really long and complex novels. So today we're going to be doing something a little more simplistic. I'm going to be talking about something else. So yeah, we're going to be doing something new today. We're going to be trying something out. I've been brainstorming ideas for what to kind of put out there to diversify my content and all that. Today we're going to be doing a new thing that I like to call Reading List, where I go through my notes app and I look at books that I've either read already and written what I thought about them, or books that I have written down that I really, really want to read. And I didn't really give myself much explanation, so this wasn't very forethought of me, but I did do some prep for this video, for this podcast. And I will be explaining to you why I want to read these, what drew me to these recommendations, hopefully give you guys a jumping off point to kind of diversify your reading lists. And I have a lot of different kinds of books on here, so I thought that this would be a fun idea and a really good way to use recommendations and just things about books that I've accumulated over the years in my notes app and have never really seen the light of day ever again, and kind of allow them to resurface and give both you and I things to think about in the future going into our next reading adventure. So yeah, let's get started, shall we? So honestly, looking at this, there's a lot of sci-fi on here, which honestly makes sense because I've been in the fantasy genre of reading for a while. At least the past year has just been actually probably more than a year now, has been really focused on epic fantasy. But sci-fi definitely makes its pretty frequent appearance in there as well, because I think those two genres are, the line between them is blurred and they're very intertwined, because if you read one, there's a high chance you're going to read the other genre. And I think both of the kinds of novels that fall into, even the ones that fall into exclusively one genre or the other, they tend to be just interesting to the other genre's readers. So I don't think it really matters. Anyway, I'm an all genre kind of reader. I don't discriminate. Even the occasional nonfiction novel will do. They're not really my cup of tea. They never really have been. But I will find the occasional nonfiction novel that's just gripping and that I really enjoy. And also, you know what? I'm a self-help aficionado. I think that they're fun. Maybe I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but I think that sometimes you just find a really impactful and powerful book and it can change your life in a subtle way. And I really like that. I also think they're the most quotable. Does that make sense? I think quotable books have something to them. They have mantras that you can repeat in your head, and just they give you a little more power. They give you a little more strength. To having something to latch onto is definitely a good thing, and I really like that. Even in my books, I like to annotate them. I don't have that much time to annotate them because I just you just want to get through it. But sometimes I'll find a quote and I'll dog ear the page on the bottom. That's my favorite thing to do ever. Or I'll just highlight a quote that I really like, and even if I don't remember to come back and kind of internalize it, in that moment I'll try to take a moment, and like I said, I'll try to take a moment and internalize it and just really feel the power of that quotation, because I think that's what so much of good prose is. Even if not all of it is quotable, when you find a line that just really resonates with you, it's life-changing. It changes your mind and it alters your brain chemistry in a subtle way that is the power of reading intrinsically. That's why we do it. Anyway, I think that's the merit of self-help books too. I think they have those quotes more often, but I digress. So the first book that I'd like to talk about that I haven't had in my list is Hyperion. Now, this is a Dan Simmons book, and it won a Hugo Award, so obviously that's a testament to how good it is. And I think the primary reason why I put it on my reading list was not just because I think it looked good, but also it is based on the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, which is a famous Middle English text that, it's a story that is comprised of a bunch of smaller stories that are told by the characters in the book. It's like they're on a pilgrimage, and each of them have a story competition, and basically whoever has the best story wins. And it's kind of like a meta type novel. I remember discussing it in English class. Hello, if you know what I'm talking about. But mostly what I'm talking about is it kind of follows a similar structure, but is just done in a completely different sci-fi way, which I thought was very attractive to me as a reader who enjoys novels that have kind of an interesting jumping off point, and then, you know, they have a unique concept and just run with it in a way that is just entirely novel. So that's what kind of drew me about Hyperion. It was obviously modeled in the style of the Canterbury Tales, and it has like a similar cadence to it from what I've heard. But the premise is different. The premise is interesting and sci-fi, and it's obviously well written, which is the reason that I really want to read this book. So I'll just give you a brief synopsis, and from there we can decide if you want to put it in your reading list or not. Okay, so essentially, there's a group of planets, a conglomerate of planets that are connected by portals, so they can all easily reach each other by portal transport without severe time dilation or without giving up much time. And then they can reach each other easily, so they're part of this group called the hegemony, I don't know. So this is where the humans reside. They also have an alliance with the Technocore, which is another civilization of artificial intelligence. So there's humans and artificial intelligence and ousters, which are modified humans, and they live in the space stations between stars, and they are in active conflict with the hegemony of man. So the conflict is between these humans and the modified humans, and the modified humans are kind of like rebels, right? So there's also outback planets, which have no farcasters, which is what the portals are called, and they can't be accessed by the main like planet systems without severe consequences of giving up a ton of time. Like you can't reach them. You have to reach them by analog methods, so they're basically cut off from the entire universe that they're in, that the main like humans reside. So one of these planets is the titular name of this book, which is Hyperion. So one of the planets is Hyperion, and Hyperion is home to structures known as time tombs, and time tombs are moving backwards in time, and for some reason they're important to the they're important to the people of this book, and they're guarded by a legendary mythical creature known as the Shrike. So the ousters, the modified humans, for some reason one day invade Hyperion. I'm assuming trying to access the time tombs potentially. I don't know. I don't really understand that from the synopsis, but essentially a pilgrimage is assembled of men, I'm pretty sure, to visit the time tombs, and they have obviously to take a long journey, and they incur a lot of time dilation because there's no portal to Hyperion. So while they're on this journey, the pilgrims each tell their tale of how they were chosen for the pilgrimage, and this is the part beyond the exposition that really mirrors the Canterbury Tales. And so that's what I thought was really interesting about this novel. It's obviously like a sci-fi setup, which is how it made its way into my list. I think it's also just a very classic science fiction novel that I think is really interesting. Like, I really love digging into genres like that and seeing, I think from my understanding, this is a very fundamental sci-fi book, which is why I want to read it. I don't know if my excitement to read that novel really came through in that kind of introduction to the synopsis, but I was kind of trying to figure it out as I went. But I am really excited to read Hyperion because it's pretty much guaranteed to be a good novel, and I just am excited what the direction is going to take. Now, this next recommendation is kind of out of left field. It doesn't really make sense for me to recommend it, but it is an example of a nonfiction novel that really piqued my interest. And I'll tell you the reason before I tell you the name of the book. Now, I am actually a fan of novels that blend memoir and nonfiction and research with anecdotes. And ultimately, blend something abstract, something seemingly completely unrelated, to come together to kind of prove a concept and to make a point about human nature or something of the sort. I think it sounds a little bit pretentious when I say it like that, but I really enjoy books that kind of come together like that and are simultaneously informative, really thoroughly researched, and overall interesting, that still keep your attention. It's not just a research paper, it's a full like dissertation on one niche topic while also providing commentary on maybe a social aspect of life or just a greater abstract idea about human nature. So this book really piqued my interest. It kind of jumped out to me from the shelf, and it's called The Book of Eels, and the subtitle is Our Enduring Fascination with the Most Mysterious Creature in the Natural World, and it's written by Patrick Svensson. Now, I thought this book was interesting because what kind of book talks about eels, right? But there's just something interesting about a deep dive on an animal that no one really, like, I don't really think about them in my day-to-day life, but when I put my mind to it, it kind of comes up blank. There's no like formal context in which you would even learn about eels other than like The Little Mermaid. You know what I'm saying? So having a book that really goes into it and combines anecdotes from various experts, from people who interact with them on the daily, and just kind of focusing a book on intrinsically trying to understand an eel is so interesting to me, and that kind of uniqueness is what attracts me to a book in the first place. And I don't know that it would be my top choice to like immediately pick up and read, but if I had time, I would definitely sit down and try to really understand and read and spend some time with this book, because I think it definitely won't be as long of a read as some of the other science fiction or fantasy novels on this list, but it will definitely be kind of a quick, worth your while kind of thing, in my opinion. And also, I think it's a lot more in depth than you would think, and that's why I really thought it would be a nice read. Now, looking at the reviews on Goodreads, I mean, I don't know that Goodreads is the most reliable platform, to be honest, because it's a kind of a bad platform. It's really poorly maintained, whatever. That's different beef, but I don't know. It has mixed reviews, but for the most part, I've gathered that the writing is very well done. Like, the nature writing part of it is good, and I think it also has a considerable part of it that is memoir, that explores father-son relationships, whatever. If that sounds like your cup of tea, I think it's definitely a good one to give a shot. I think that it could definitely be a little hit or miss. I don't know. Maybe nature writing's not your kind of thing. Maybe memoir writing's not your cup of thing. Maybe you don't really want to blend, but, you know, I think it's definitely worth a spot on the list, at least. Give it a shot. Who knows? Okay, next up we have one that I'm actually really excited about because I actually did read this book. It's not on my to be read, it's on my I already did read. But I picked this one up in a used bookstore in New York, and I really, really liked it. I think that it's just an overall interesting piece of investigative writing, of research writing, of writing that is done well to a point where it has a structure, it has a flow, it definitely has some sort of narrative, but it's not a story. It's just a book about stories that are put into place to piece together a history, which I really enjoyed. I thought this one was a hit. Right off the bat, I think it's an interesting one because each chapter is kind of compartmentalized. You don't have to read it all in one go. I certainly didn't. I really spaced this book out. I finished it after a really long time, but that's just because this book is a good one to have in your back pocket, if you know what I mean. Like, it won't necessarily fit in your back pocket, but it's a good one to just keep by you whenever you want a chapter to read or whenever you want something to read. So yeah, this one is called The Poisoner's Handbook by Deborah Bloom. Now, Deborah Bloom is a very decorated writer. She won the Pulitzer Prize for one of her other works. Definitely, you know it's going to be a good piece of literature, but I think if you're not super accustomed to nonfiction, I think this is the book for you, because even if it's not right off the bat your cup of tea, I think it's just completely interesting. Like, it's an absolutely riveting book just because of its subject matter. It's talking about the history of poison in New York, and it's kind of from the perspective of coroners and the people who are directly involved with that kind of thing. It talks about moonshine, it talks about radium, it talks about all of that. And it's just a very good book. It's not one that I could make a whole episode about, unfortunately, just because it's not really plot or character heavy, but it just has a ton of information that is presented in a really accessible, interesting way. It doesn't get boring, really. Each kind of description is interesting. It gives you a ton of things that you definitely didn't know before, and it's just a good example of a perfect marriage between anecdotes and information and investigation that I really thought was amazing. So if you have a book that you have never heard of before that you should probably put on your reading list, it's definitely this one. It's The Poisoner's Handbook by Deborah Bloom. Once again, I really could not recommend it more. It's not like a fantasy book, but it definitely shouldn't take you that much time to complete. And if you want, you can spread it out. I don't know. It's just, to me, it's the perfect book. It's just good. It's simple, it's good, and it's interesting. There you go. All right, next on my list is a trip back into the fantasy genre. Thank God we were gone for too long, let me just say. Now, this book is one that is also written by a very well-known author and just strikes me as a very interesting read. I don't know all that much about the plot, but I'll tell you what drew me to it. Okay, so this one is Babel by R.F. Kuang, I believe, and it is a historical epic fantasy that talks about colonial resistance and language and translation and the British Empire, I guess. I don't know. To me, what's really interesting about this is the magic system, is the kind of institution, the setting of this book, is what drew me to kind of pick it off the shelf and put it in my recommendations, in my to be read. So, essentially, to my knowledge, the gist of this novel is that there is an orphan and he's brought to London by a mysterious professor where he trains in ancient languages such as Latin, ancient Greek, and Chinese, which isn't ancient, but you get what I'm saying. And this is in preparation to enroll in Oxford University's prestigious translation program, the Royal Institute of Translation, which is also known as Babel, in reference to the Tower of Babel in the Bible, where, they work together to make a tower Babel. What am I saying? Yeah, Tower of Babel. To reach the heavens, and all of a sudden God was like, no, and he decided to disperse everyone and make everyone speak a different language so that they couldn't understand each other and couldn't complete it. So that's a pretty good symbolism, I think, for language and translation. There's a current language learning network that is now called Babel, or Babel, I don't know. But the point is that the Tower of Babel is often used as symbolism for subject matter that has to do with language. So that's obviously where this magic system and this novel comes into play. So this prestigious Institute of Translation, which is Babel, is the world's center for translation and magic. That's what makes this important. And the central, magical conduit of this world is silver working, and it's quote unquote the art of manifesting the meaning lost in translation using enchanted silver bars, which makes the British apparently unparalleled in colonial power. And this arcane craft serves the empire's quest for colonization. So basically, it's talking about how this institute is the direct feeder of what leads the British Empire to be so powerful, because with the power of translation and silver, they're able to understand the meaning of various texts and various lost in translation symbolisms. I don't really know, but I just think this premise is so interesting to me, because you have a fantasy world that is automatically based on something that not many are, which is, let's be honest, that's the framework for a good novel. When you have a world-building magic system, especially in the fantasy genre, where you have world-building that is based on something that has not been done before. I don't know if there obviously have been language-based magic systems in the past, but there's just an interesting interplay of metal magic and language magic that come together to make something unique in this novel that I think deserves a spot on the list. So if any of that piqued your interest, feel free to put it on your list. I think it just sounds interesting. It sounds great. It sounds well written. It sounds like it's from an author who has absolutely made impressive and great novels before, like Poppy War. So why not give this one a try, you know? Um, and honestly, a lot of the reviews say that this novel surpassed her previous trilogy. So I don't know. Take it with a grain of salt. I know that in the fantasy world, the Poppy War trilogy is very highly lauded. So I'm sure this one is really great as well. Before I finish my recommendation of this one, though, take it with a grain of salt. I've never read this book, and I'm only really going off of reviews and the synopsis itself, so the premise might be really great, but I don't know necessarily how the execution is. I don't know if there is a lot of nuance in this book. From what I've read, it seems that this one leans a little more over explanation heavy, doesn't really rely too heavily on subtext to carry the allegories that she's trying to convey. So I don't know. I'd say give it a try. I think I definitely will in the future, but just some things to keep in mind. Okay, moving on. So another one that so this one I started, but I never quite finished, and not because it wasn't good, but just because of the circumstances in which I read it. I borrowed this one from my friend, and it turned out that we couldn't like be around each other for any longer, so I couldn't finish it. But I've been meaning to get back to it, but I don't know, maybe I went through the first part too quickly that I just never got around to it, and I kind of moved on to other things. And as school picked up, I couldn't really have the time to actually, I don't know, read it. But this one is To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. Now, this book, if my memory serves me correctly, I read it a while ago, or I started to at least, and I really enjoyed it. I think, full disclosure, what drew me to it is the cover art. The cover art is gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's black and blue, and it's metallic, and it's just a pretty cover. And I think, don't judge me, but sometimes you gotta judge a book by its cover, especially if it's in a positive way. Sometimes really good books hide under ugly covers, but I find more often than not, good books hide under good covers. Just saying. Like, you can have it the other way around, but you know. So what drew me to this was the cover. And I found myself liking this book. I found myself thinking, I didn't think too deeply into it, but it was just gripping, you know? I think I remember a book I would compare it to. I don't think it's that similar, but the feeling that it gave me reminds me a little bit of another book I read at least 3 years ago. It's gotta be 3 years ago at this point. And it was called Nyxia. This other book is called Nyxia. I think that I read this book before I really made an entrance into the epic fantasy, more adult sci-fi genre. So Nyxia was definitely a good like segue between young adult and like older, more mature novels. So I still think it was more childish than what I would read now, but it was definitely a good book. Like, it gave me the impression of being really good. And the things that happened were dramatic. It was an interesting piece of like magic, science fiction. It was in space. There was good conflict. The pacing was pretty good from what I remember. So that's what I would compare To Sleep in a Sea of Stars with. I don't remember the plot so much, but I do remember that I would place it in the same kind of pool with Nyxia, and from my impression, they were both pretty good. So there's two recommendations in one. I would put them on the list for sure, like easily. I think Nyxia was definitely more like YA in that kind of, sphere of teenagers. Maybe, I mean, it was released a while ago, so I think that it kind of fell into that wave of books. Yeah, so I think it was 2017 that Nyxia was released. So it definitely makes sense for that time. And but when I read it, I thought it was creative. I thought it was interesting. It was a definite sci-fi must-read. If you want something a little lighter, you can definitely complete this one in one sitting. And the trilogy is pretty good as well. It kept me engaged from what I remember. To Sleep in the Sea of Stars, in my opinion, is a little more adult. It's more complex. It's more mature, I'd say. Not necessarily just in the content, but just in the scope of the novel. It was winner of Best Science Fiction in the 2020 Goodreads Choice Awards. So it's a pretty good novel, and it's pretty highly rated as well. So this is a first contact story. This is a story of first human contact with aliens, with an alien technology, alien substance, alien being. In that sense, this book is good. I didn't, like I said, I never finished it, so I think I have to start over and just give it a really fair reread, because I don't want to speak on it like I've already read it and give you a skewed recommendation. But I know this, from what I understand about this book, from what I remember, from what I've read, from what I know about the premise, it's a good book. There's good characters, there's good pacing. I mean, I think it can be, it definitely lulled a little bit when I was trying to get through it, but there is, for the most part, good pacing. It's an interesting premise. It's that first contact with a twist. There's humor, from what I understand. There is stakes. The stakes are high, but there's also a good sense of companionship and just kind of regularity in a sci-fi novel that is sometimes missing. But it was an emotional read, and from what I understand, will continue to be. So I definitely would put this on your recommendation list if you're looking for a good sci-fi novel that deals with aliens more so than just space pilgrimages and like AI, you know? I think there's definitely something to be said for that. So yeah, there you have it, a 2-in-1, Nyxia and To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. Take your pick, whichever one you are more drawn to. I think both are worth giving a shot. I don't know. I think all the books I'm recommending kind of hit or miss. Depends on who you are, depends on what genre you prefer. If you like a little more YA, but you still want to dabble on sci-fi, maybe choose Nyxia first. If you want something way longer, 880 pages, something that, you know, see if you can find your momentum in the first bit of it and then try to keep going. I choose To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. World building is great. The way that he writes, I find enjoyable. So there you go. 2 recommendations from my list. Yay. Okay, here's another one that I remember being really excited about, and I think this is for today, the only DNF, or did not finish, that I'm going to mention. So here we go. It's Jade City by Fonda Lee. Now, don't attack me. I know a lot of people really like this book, but I couldn't get into it. I know maybe crime syndicate type fantasy novels are not for me. Maybe that's just it. But I don't know. I just couldn't get into it. I got maybe 200, 100 pages in. It didn't grip me. The world building was all right. I think it makes sense to have a world. It's pretty unique. It's a unique premise based on Jade that grants powers. But to me, I couldn't get into it. I didn't really care that much about the conflict. I don't know. Maybe I just didn't get far enough into it. I just couldn't do it. It's kind of rare that I don't finish a book just because, you know, usually most of the time I feel like if I pick it up, I have to see it through. But if it's that grueling, I won't. I just didn't feel an attachment to the characters. I didn't feel like I was invested in which of the clans won. It just felt too facetious for me. It was too, I don't know. A lot of people say that they always really wanted to read it. I definitely wanted to read it. I was excited. I hear some of my favorite book YouTubers talk about it. I don't know. I really wanted to like it, but I couldn't. And I'm not going to try to tell you it's not a good book. I mean, it's critically acclaimed. It is, for most people, a good book. But I just didn't enjoy it. So, you know, there's an option. Put it on your reading list. Maybe don't. I personally didn't like it that much, but, you know, it is there. I don't know, maybe I'm taking it too far, but it was kind of a bummer because this was definitely very recommended to me and it just didn't deliver. I don't know, I couldn't get into it. Maybe, I think it's just not my genre. I think gang activity and like gang wars, it's not as gripping to me and it doesn't have as high of a stakes as I would like. I don't know. Not my cup of tea, but I do think still it's worth reading, maybe. I don't know. I'm very open to the possibility of giving it a shot in the future, just not right now. I hope this new format is somewhat interesting to you guys because I have been waiting for a moment to kind of share some of my more hidden recommendations with the world. I don't know. But I think I'll just close this episode off by talking about perhaps a more expected recommendation out of me, which is Mistborn, the Mistborn trilogy. I highly recommend it. I think it is one of Brandon Sanderson's more accessible works. If you haven't really been understanding my episodes on Stormlight Archive and still find it interesting and want a segue into his work that isn't just jumping into a 1,000-something page novel, I would definitely recommend Mistborn. I think it's fast paced, the characters are amazing, the world building is incredible, the magic system is mind blowing and just interesting, and it's not that difficult to follow, in my opinion. And throughout the trilogy, it's engaging. There, like I said, I think I mentioned it at one point. The second book did kind of lull for me at certain points, but it definitely picked back up by the end, made me super excited to read the last novel, and all in all was just a really solid, great trilogy. I loved Vin and Elend, and just all of the characters are just so wonderful and interesting, and their dynamic is great, and there's definitely still surprises in store by the third novel. Like, there, no doubt about it, there are surprises that are going to hit you in the face, and each novel just has revelations and interesting characters, and characters that you wouldn't expect to like, but I found myself incredibly attached to. So if you're looking for a good, like, jumping off point into Brandon Sanderson, I would 1000% recommend Mistborn. Still think about it to this day, even though I read it a year and a half ago or something at this point. But I really, really love it. Really, really, truly enjoyed it. And I find that I will recommend it to any person I see. And it was on my to be read list for not as long as some of these other books, I will tell you that, because once I started reading it, once I got this novel, I just couldn't stop. I loved it so much, and it has led me to be here where I am today, and kind of really was my introduction to my love for this fantasy genre, and for my love and prolonged love of reading ever since I was a kid. But this was really the one that I remember and will always remember as being just a great, great series. So thank you so much, guys, for tuning in today. I thought I wouldn't bore you with like 15 more minutes of recommendations, but I think that this is a pretty good starter pack, if I had to say so myself. If you want a little bit of this, a little bit of that, I think that these recommendations that I outlined for you today were really great. Put them on your to be read. Try a couple of them out, see how you like it. If you don't like it, another one that I mentioned in this video will probably strike your fancy. So hopefully that motivates you a little bit to get to reading. And if you don't have the time, well, when you do, pick one of these up. I promise you won't regret it. All right, thank you. That's it for today. I will see you next time in a couple of weeks. Please enjoy your time, and I will see you then.